Good morning and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today is Rosalinda Guillen. So nice to meet you, Rosalinda, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's nice to meet you also. Nice to meet everybody out there that's listening.
Yes, me too. I wish I could be more of those listeners and followers and viewers. And we always like to encourage conversation. So, those tuning in today, listening, if there's something that we're talking about that you have a question about or you want to comment on, we hope you'll do that, whether it's on YouTube or on our podcast, so that we can continue these conversations and focus on our guests and listeners and make sure that we bring the proper content and make it available. So I digress. Rosalinda, I'd love to introduce you. I know you're the founder of a community to community and lead strategist and visionary within the non hierarchical eco-feminine leadership of C2C, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Wow, that is a mouthful. And I want to make sure that we do you the courtesy of really giving you an opportunity to explain what that is, both what your role is and what C2C is.
It's a long story. Basically, what it is, it's an experiment founded by myself with a lot of support from other women organizers in the labor movement, environmental justice movement, human rights organizers. A lot of my friends back in 1999, the year 2000 or so, we were having conversations about women organizing in the movement, right, as women, and especially in the labor movement, about the continuing sexism and competition, and the definition of power within social justice movements in general. And also, I'm a farm worker, so I grew up here in Skagit County. My family were all farm workers for generations. I'm the oldest of eight, and we've all worked in the fields in Washington State. So my key organizing area is in the farm worker community with farm workers, agricultural industry, food producing. And so that's the area that I'm from. That's who I am. I am a farm worker. I've worked in the fields. I raised my two oldest sons, migrating and in labor, living in labor camps and working. So I understand, that's my culture. That's who I am as a farm worker, but also I'm a woman and I'm an organizer. And the idea was that there really is not, I couldn't find a political space for farm workers that is broader than, just organizing farm workers and not really having a vision for a better food system in general, because we're members, we're like, sometimes I think we're confined in the food system. So the idea was to create an organization that was women led and organizing both on the ground and policy, legislative areas and human rights areas from the farm worker perspective. So community to community development was founded with that goal in mind, that it was a farm worker justice organization that would be led by farm workers, starting with me, from the United States, that had been organizing for quite a while. And my experience has been organizing using the Cesar Chavez farm worker organizing model.
Can you talk to us what the Cesar Chavez model is, so that the listeners and the people viewing this that are not familiar with this can get an insight into more about what you're talking about?
Yeah, for folks who, I mean, when I say the farm worker, the Cesar Chavez farm worker organizing model, we're talking about the way that Caesar and Dolores Huerta founded the United Farm Workers of America, which was a very basic house meeting campaigns. It was the house meeting model where you actually go and knock on doors and ask to talk to farm workers and have conversations with them, and then you say, can I come back tomorrow? Do you think, you bring up issues, and the farm workers would bring up issues with Caesar, and he would say that those are really important issues. Do you have other farm workers that have the same issue? Can you gather them tomorrow and we'll have a meeting here at your house? And then from that, then other farm workers would come, and then Caesar would schedule house meetings with the other farm workers who would gather more farm workers in their homes, and the numbers would grow, right? And in educating, and the house meeting campaigns then would go towards a large community meeting. So all of these folks that he was meeting with in their homes, they would, with the help of those farm workers, they would schedule a big community meeting to have a larger conversation about prioritizing issues, but more importantly, what are we going to do about it? What are you willing to do about this? And so that's what we call the Cesar Chavez organizing model. But the other component of the model that he and Dolores Huerta developed was it was linked, many times it was linked to civic engagement. In the 50s and 60s, the majority of the farm workers working in the fields were US citizens. We were born in Texas and Arizona. We were US based farm workers. And so registering them to vote and having them participate in the civic process was a really important component of the Cesar Chavez organizing model. The organizing model that the landless people's movement uses in Brazil, that they organized, and they're in the millions now. The landless people have millions of members of the landless people's movement and the founding of the US Social Forum. So all of the organizing for years, over 20 years, led to the founding of the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre, Brazil, which I was very privileged in attending. And I learned a lot about a solidarity economy, about sustainability and protecting the earth, about how you link the organizing on the ground to environmental justice, to protecting Mother Earth, and also how do you build economic models that help to sustain better wages and better production that doesn't damage the people or the earth. So I was able to attend the very first social forum in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2001. And it was
So,
amazing.
so when you started this, we're going back to the 1990s, and you first were organizing and bringing everyone together. Did you ever imagine that you'd be following these outlines, these Cesar Chavez and all these different people's ways of building their organizations to where you are today?
No, not at all. And I guess I'll go back when you said the 1990s. My organizing roots began with the founding of the Rainbow Coalition in Washington State.
So, what is, for those that are not familiar, the Rainbow Coalition?
The Rainbow Coalition was formed as part of the campaign to elect Jesse Jackson as the first Black president of the United States.
Okay, and so this was your first entree into organizing and getting involved. And
Yes.
how did it lead from Jesse Jackson to labor and farm?
Well, the Jesse Jackson campaign um, knocked on my door to be part of the campaign to help support electing a Black president. Which, and up to that time, I was not political at all. I was, not involved. I wasn't even registered to vote. I was in my late 30s. And the engaging into the Jesse Jackson campaign led to very accomplished local organizers forming the Whatcom County, the local Rainbow Coalition in Whatcom County. And that's where I learned what just community organizing was about.
Okay, so was it at that moment that you knew as a farmer, this is how you were going to build out support and create change?
No, no, actually, it was when you first learn to organize and you understand the structure that the world has created for you to participate, especially as a farm worker. This is where I actually learned that as a farm worker, I was part of this big, larger agricultural industry, that we were all in this agricultural industry. And the Rainbow Coalition was multiracial and multi issue. So, and it was community based. So it was community organizing from the bottom up. And I think those are the things that I learned from the rainbow. It was an organizing, cohort kind of. But our Rainbow Coalition in Whatcom County had at its peak over 600 dues paying members. And we were participating in electoral politics, starting with Jesse, but then we continued after Jesse Jackson lost. We continued building the rainbow and doing local electoral politics and civic engagement for voters, especially poor, the working poor, the homeless, and the disenfranchised in our community in Whatcom County. And that taught me a lot about how you reach out to folks and engage them into a process that they have very little hope in and have never participated in before, because I was one of those people.
Right. So what are can you give us maybe three different things that you learned from there that you took with you on your journey and what led you to, transitioning and it not really being quite as political, although you are quite political, but equally, more specifically engaged in the farmer, you know, uh, connection.
I learned at the Rainbow Coalition that I was a farm worker first and foremost, that the value that I brought to the community and to society was my skills and my understanding of being a farm worker in the agricultural industry. And I learned what the agricultural industry was. And I learned that the agricultural industry was founded on slavery. I learned that it was founded on stolen land, the production of food in the United States. I also learned that my family and other families as farm workers, we never had a chance to really realize what everybody calls, I guess, the American dream opportunities. We were poverty. We were involved, had always been in this generational poverty cycle because we were farm workers.
So how did your role there then help you create a new narrative so that you could then, you know, come out of that mindset and work towards creating something that was sustainable um, and fruitful?
Because I became a leader in the rainbow. I ended up leading different areas of the Rainbow Coalition, especially the food sovereignty areas, the people of color being engaged in in electoral politics. And I was listened to about my ideas of a better way for farm workers to live, a better way for farm workers to be part of this United States. And the fact that I was a worker and that as a worker I had power.
So my understanding is that under this program of area of food sovereignty, there are a few different projects that you're working on. Can you talk to us a little bit about those projects?
Yes, a lot of the food sovereignty work that we're doing is about how food is produced. And one of those areas that we're really focusing on is, and this is a way that we look at how do we build ways within our organization, community to community, for farm workers to take leadership and for farm workers to use their skills and their visions and bring them and manifest them, make them happen. So the one thing I learned in Brazil at the World Social Forum was the idea of the solidarity economy, building a solidarity economy through workers owning the means of production, through worker owned cooperatives. And in Brazil, I saw thousands and thousands of workers with all different types of worker owned co ops. So, community to community, worker owned cooperative development is huge. And we have land where we are training and developing worker owned farming co ops. And that's the idea, is our vision is to be able to develop farm workers' ability to show our community a new way or a better way that farm workers can produce food and still be part of food systems.
So, what inspired you to be on this mission in food with the farm workers and the labor union?
The inspiration really was that the realization that I was a farm worker and that the poverty that we had lived in and that my father, the lack of opportunities for my father were not that it was that there was an infrastructure in the United States that kept farm workers poor, and that there was ways to make that better. That didn't have to be that way.
So
And
what ways have you come up with since then, or what were your hopes when you had that realization? You're like, okay, I need to make this better. I'm going to create this, organization, or work with these people and the community to be able to improve the situation. What were you hopeful for then, and how were you doing it?
well, the recognition of farm workers being in the community. First of all, farm workers being in the community. Farm workers in most rural communities are invisible. They do all the work, but they're not part of the community. They're there, but they're not part of the community. So recognition of the skills that farm worker bring to food production in local communities. That was one. The other one was raising the wages for that skilled work. The recognition that the work that farm workers are doing is very skilled. It's just as skilled as the farmers that they're working for. And so building community awareness and education that farm workers have skills that need to be compensated for, that it isn't entry level work, it is highly skilled work. And that highly skilled work is keeping a food system in the United States and locally vibrant, and more importantly, profitable for the farmers and the industry itself.
So, I know that you're champion for the farm workers under their food sovereignty program. In doing this, my understanding is they partner with a variety of different organizations. What's it like to partner with them? How do they come to a consensus?
Well, I think, when you're talking about other organizations, it's the consensus has to include an equitable discussion of who we are and why we're all working together.
So you're saying that in order for it to be effective, everybody has to be able to have a voice, come together, and be able to share their feelings, their thoughts, what's working, what's not, and then everyone can come to a consensus. Is that challenging?
It is very challenging because farm workers are not normally part of a lot of these spaces. Within other community organizations in rural communities, but then also less so even in decision making spaces when it comes to local government and state government. So we have developed ways to include farm workers because there's language barriers, there's class barriers. Most farm workers are very poor, so the ability to be able to afford to move and to participate is a barrier. And those are the barriers that community to community works to undo or to provide support for farm workers so they can participate equitably.
When we look at the experience that you've had teaching garden for agroecological farming methods, what have you found farmers interested in changing?
Interesting. Farm workers come because most of the farm workers that are immigrating into the United States are farmers themselves in Mexico or the country they come from. So they already come with a knowledge of growing food in sustainable ways without pesticides, how to use water better, how to understand the soil and grow the foods that do better in that soil, how to farm. There's different farming methods. And this is something that I have spoken a lot to, you know, big farmers, corporate farmers, and local farmers. And in general, I believe that the future of sustainable food production in the United States and food security in the United States is being squandered by not including more new immigrant farmers or peasants that are settling in the United States in envisioning better sustainable food production methods. We have people, for example, in Seattle. I'm just gonna because this is local, right? In Seattle,
It's not local, it's global.
it's global, yeah. But in Seattle, we have people from Africa, from Ethiopia, from the Middle East, from South America, living in urban centers that are peasant farmers where they were, and they're looking for little pieces of land to grow food. And I'm thinking, if we were smart as a country, we would look at all of these immigrants that are new citizens of the United States and look at all of these food production methods and skills that they bring and look at climate change and the opportunities that we have here with more resources to have more better food security by including the immigrant farmers in the decision making on how food production is going to be um, um, what am I trying developed for this future that's hitting us really hard with climate change. How do we protect the soil?
So, speaking of that, I'm wondering, as these farmers come in from different countries and around the world, and you start to see some of their practices, what have you learned from them that you are now incorporating into your initiatives?
Well, a lot of it is the use of water. You know, how to make sure that you preserve water, that you use water the best that you can, but also that you grow food that is more can adapt better to our local climate, soil, and geography. So, you know, if we're looking at different crops, and I think that that's what these immigrant farmers do is they want to grow their own food that they used to eat at home, you know, and so they try to do that, and they look at how the soil is and how to adapt the sun, the water, and also how to adapt different structures to be able to grow food. And I think conversations with some of these immigrant farmers has been very um, enriching for us. And most of the conversations that we have are farmers from Guerrero and Oaxaca and southern Mexico because they've lost some of their water, some of their land has been poisoned by toxins and other issues from manufacturing.
When we spoke earlier on, you were saying that it's really important to adapt to some of the processes that the farmers that are coming from around the world use. And we talk about water. And then you mentioned that, they're trying to grow some of the fruits and vegetables that they use in their country. However, equally, I think you communicated that it was important to think about what works in our climate. So I'm wondering how that all plays together, because if we're talking about growing what works with our environment and our climate, that's sort of the opposite of what people from around the world, these farmers that you were mentioning, come and are doing. They want to grow what their fruits and vegetables were elsewhere. So how do you navigate that?
It's actually exciting. Um, the growing of food that grows better here, Northwest foods, for example, you know what we can grow in our climate, which is like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, local foods. Then there's a blending happening of the immigrant farmers or the immigrant farm workers that are living in this country learning to eat, for example, eggplant or other vegetables, and blending that together and finding out ways to grow some of their own food that they can. Not all of it. It's not possible to do it all. You know, you maybe have a few, like for example, chile cayote, which is a specific squash that actually ended up growing really well in the Northwest. And so then they focus on the ones that can grow better in the local climate. But you know, the processes of growing different types of food is it's like the techniques and the skills that different farmers bring and blending those all together with the climate and the soil and the resources that we have here. But the other processes that we talk about is the social component of how farm workers from other countries farm, which is more of a communal process. It's more of a family process where everybody's involved in doing the work and the sharing.
So if you can integrate this going forward and help people, take from that culture, the community drive to build their farms, what do you hope to see in our culture with farming?
I would hope to see the vision is what we're calling ejidos. It's like acreage or acres or chunks of land, like say anywhere between 30 to 100 acres of land, where families are on the land communally producing food and selling it to culturally appropriate food, but also food to make money that they can, make money off and living on the land. It's like a
So,
community farm.
so what you're saying is you're hoping that by integrating this, people could grow their food, sell some of it, have enough to eat for themselves, and become self-sustaining,
Exactly. And live
and
together.
live together. Do you see that that is something that the US is demanding? Or do you feel like it's something that, if I guess let's go with the first question. Is the US demanding this? Is the US farm community, asking for something like this?
They are. I think they are. And I think that the answer is in a collaboration with immigrant communities, and they're not looking at that. You see articles, we read about it all the time. Farmers having to sell their land because their children no longer want to farm. They're growing old on the farm. There nobody wants to farm anymore. Losing the farm. Young farmers. I know young farmers. They're not immigrants. They're young. The children of farmers trying to farm, and they're not able to do it. I just, talked to some young farmers. They tried for 10 years and they could not sustain it. They just could not survive economically. I think that there's a solution if we look at community farming using cooperative development processes for keeping the society within that community farm equitable and working together. The collaboration that cooperative development gives us, the processes for democracy in decision making on a piece of land for farmers, is the solution. And if we build these community farms, we call it ejido, which is what they were in Mexico, but it could be, different ways. My point is that a lot of small organic family farmers and young people that want to farm are asking for a solution for them to be able to keep farming.
So I'm curious, as you integrate these different communities and cultures from around the world, what role does regenerative agriculture play in it for you?
Oh, it's totally, it has to be central. And I think that that's the way to address also climate change at the local level.
Hmm.
Monitoring the climate change itself, which is on a global scale. We have
Hmm.
no idea what's coming or how we're going to have to work together so that we can all eat, during these climate crises that keep happening. We're hoping that it lessens, but it doesn't appear to be. And I think that that's a very that conversation, the level of conversation has to rise about, the common need to be able to have food security at the local level, where we don't need to worry about shipping and how does it get to us. We have it here already in the different areas.
So much information, Rosalinda. So much more we could talk about, but I'd love to maybe bring you back. And in this moment, though, as we close this conversation, I just would love to hear from you as you lead these initiatives and you lead these communities and you drive the community forward to incorporate different cultures. Um, what are you most hopeful to see in the next 3 to 5 years? What kind of change?
I think farm workers owning land and beginning to farm in the traditional ways that they know how to farm in communally, and the land being owned in different types of community land trusts so that it cannot be sold for profit, and we begin to steward food producing land. I would like to in 5 years see, at least in our area here, 300 to 500 acres in community farms from being built by indigenous immigrant farm workers interacting with the larger farming community in our community in here in this area.
Right. Thank you so much, Rosalinda, for joining me today and having this conversation. It was really enlightening, and I'd love to hear about the different cultures that we're bringing together to help move the farming and agriculture industries forward. So think collaboration is what I got out of this. Think community, and community is at the foundation of so many things. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.